Well, hello everyone. So, welcome to week 3. We're going to be talking about ethics, and you're also going to find on the D2L checklist for this week a couple of other things for you to watch and review. So, be sure to check that out as well. Now, there are 3 different video links in this PowerPoint that I'm not going to be able to show while I'm recording this. So be sure that you go back into the PowerPoint and click on the links so that you can review those videos as well. All right, so just to touch on ethical research, why is it important for us? So we already hit on the scientific method last week, and that was important because in order for us to effectively approach scientific research, we want to make sure that we have an understanding of what the scientific method is and what doing evidence-based research is all about. But for um, us to be successful as researchers, we also want to make sure that we are conducting research in an ethical manner. This has been a concern for researchers for a really long time, but certainly in the field of psychology, um, it is an ongoing concern for us because of a sorted past that we have as a discipline where different research studies have been carried out previously that weren't so ethical and certainly didn't treat people or protect people in the way that it should have. And so, because of that, today we make sure that there are safeguards to ensure that people are treated ethically, that they're protected. And so we can look back throughout the history of psychology and two of the videos that I have posted for you at the end of this PowerPoint involve some of those studies. Now, while they were foundational to some of the things that we've learned and pushed the field of psychology forward, they also included behaviors that created harmful situations for people. And while you may watch those videos and say, well, that doesn't seem that bad. I mean, it's not great, but it's not terrible. But unfortunately, what we know is that unethical practices and research can be a slippery slope. All we have to do is look to World War II, Nazi Germany, and prisoners being these study subjects for just atrocious studies. So, following World War II, we really saw a rise in the demand for ethical treatment of research studies and just general requirements of scientists, doctors, and other people who are conducting research so that we never saw that level of harm done to anyone who was involved in research again. So, the first point of consideration, of course, is it okay for us to lie to our research participants? I wanted to pose this question, and if we were in class together, we'd have some time to talk about it, but I want you to take a moment to think about it and ultimately, I don't know, maybe wrestle with it. Is it okay to lie to people who are involved in research? This is certainly one of those gray areas of ethics. Well, the answer ultimately is yes, it is okay with the correct motivation and justification. And it's not something that we want to do all the time. So, in research, this is known as deception. And given the correct reasoning behind it, we can justify when we go to the IRB, which we're going to talk about momentarily, to get permission to conduct research. If we can justify the need for deception, it is okay for us to use it. Sometimes we do research and it's not advantageous for us to tell the person right away what it is we're actually doing. Because, for example, maybe what we want to know is how people respond under a high pressure situation. But maybe what we tell them is we want them to come in and fill out some surveys about a specific topic. And then we have them wait for the study to begin and we put them in a stressful situation. Maybe we have them waiting for a long time and then have two people involved in the study start arguing in a really tense way in front of them to see if they respond to that stress. Maybe we then later ask them questions about how they felt in that moment, or we just monitor their body language or see if they get up to leave, etc. So sometimes we want to get at something without the person knowing it so that we can get at the real information. When participants know what the study's about, maybe they will act in a certain way that they expect the researcher to act to. That's what they think the researcher is expecting of them. So it is utilized, but we have to be able to justify it. Is using this deception going to cause an excessive amount of distress in the individual in any way? Is it going to take away their right to be informed about their choice to participate in the study? And is this truly the only way that we can get at the information that we're wanting to get at? So something to think about. All right. So this really brings us to the conflict of the researcher. And that is the pursuit of knowledge or the protection of people. So we know for doctors, researchers, most people in the helping professions, one of our number one ethical mandates is to do no harm. So we have a mandate to not only not be harming people, but to do good for them. And so we want to protect them, and particularly those individuals who are very vulnerable, such as children or those who are disabled, people in prison, those that are considered very vulnerable populations. So, yeah, then we have to ask ourselves, when we think about conducting a research study, is this pushing forward the cause of the field, the cause of science, and is this adequately protecting individuals who would be involved? And what if I have to choose between the two? What if my choice is protecting someone completely, but not doing anything to move forward a particular area of knowledge that could be helpful? Or could I hurt people a little bit and push the field forward pretty significantly? So, yeah, this is something that I want you to continue to think about as we move through the next few slides, because we're going to come back to this as we consider the trolley problem. But for now, we're going to move into a couple of schools of thought when it comes to ethics. There are lots of different approaches to ethics, which is one thing that makes the field of ethics pretty interesting, in that there are multiple ways of thinking about things, and there's a lot of gray area. A lot of people want ethics to be black or white. You should do this or you shouldn't do this. But most of the time, there's quite a bit of gray area, and it really depends on the way that you view the world around you. So, there are three main methods of ethical thinking we're going to cover: deontology, ethical skepticism, and utilitarianism. So, I thought we could borrow some help from the Marvel Universe to talk about these things. I feel like most people have seen at least one of the Marvel movies. This is, of course, Captain America, and he's a great representation of these methods. He believes in a universal moral code, and he believes that certain actions are inherently wrong and should never be performed. Captain America was born and then ultimately created during a time where moral certainty was, kind of the rule of the day. There was a real understanding of right and wrong in terms of the way that society discussed it. So, because of that, Captain America really thrives off the sense that there is truly a black and white in every situation, that there are things that are just inherently wrong and bad and should not be done. And then there are certain actions that just should never be performed. And that this is a universal moral code, meaning that it should apply to anyone in any situation. And while there are certain things for sure, like we shouldn't do a study where we're murdering people, I think we can all agree that that would be wrong. Um, a lot of what we believe to be ethically okay or not okay in a study, again, leaves some gray area. Now, there are some universal moral codes, but a lot of our ethics codes leave room for interpretation. So another approach to ethical thought is ethical skepticism. And I thought that the Black Widow is a great example of this. So ethical skepticism in this area, ethics are arbitrary and pretty much relative to culture and time. So Black Widow, she was raised as a spy, right? Like that's what she was trained at from a little girl. And she has worked for all kinds of organizations around the world, some terroristic organizations, different governments. She's been on both sides of the coin. So for her, it makes sense to have an ethics code that is going to be relative to the circumstances that she's in. She's not carrying around this universal understanding of right or wrong like Captain America, because she's been placed in lots of different situations and seen lots of different perspectives and justifications. So for her, ethics are a matter of one's own conscience. You do what you believe to be right or wrong, and you do it based on your own moral compass and not anyone else's compass around you. And so in this way, the individual really takes a lot of ownership over their approach to ethics. Now, the last one here, this is, of course, T'Challa, the Black Panther. And he not only is, the Black Panther superhero, he's the king of Wakanda. And if you've ever seen any of the Marvel movies that he's in, and certainly Black Panther, you'll find that he very much ascribes to the ethical approach, kind of utilitarianism. So for the king of Wakanda, he believes that his decisions have to be based on what's best for the greater good. He judges his actions depending on the consequences of that action. And we see this throughout the Black Panther movie, where his motivations are really to do what's best for Wakanda. Now, his idea about that changes later on because he realizes that maybe he has a responsibility to people beyond just the borders of his country. But as their king, as their superhero, he believes that his actions truly depend on their ultimate consequences and if they're going to benefit the greater good. So when we think about ethics in the field of psychology, while there is, I would say, some of our ethical guidelines really lay out us following an ethical compass, a lot of what we are going to be following is one, some of those bigger themes of this is for sure not okay. And the rest is making decisions based on the greater good, really following that utilitarian point of view. So we're going to hit up here for just a moment the APA Ethics Code on Research. Now, depending on what field you're in, specifically in psychology, what your license might be, what organizations you belong to, you may follow different ethics codes, but we're going to look at the one from the American Psychological Association. And I'm just going to hit on this briefly, but certainly you'll want to review this more in your text and maybe check out the APA Ethics Code online. So, first of all, if you're going to conduct research, it's important to get institutional approval and oversight. And this is important for lots of reasons. Now, if you're not at a university, typically you're going to be working for an organization, a hospital, et cetera. But a lot of research is conducted at universities. And within those universities is the Institutional Review Board, which we're going to see a little bit of information on in a little bit, but you're going to submit an application and they're going to review it and make sure that everyone involved in your study is protected and that you're carrying your study out in a way that is in accordance with ethical guidelines and state and federal laws. Part of that application and in preparation for a research study is putting together what's known as the informed consent. And you'll see on D2L that I have a little extra credit assignment for you regarding informed consent, so you can check that out. But if you've ever participated in a research study, and I know many of you have, you filled out the informed consent. This is the form that you give permission to the researcher to include you in the study. It goes over your rights as a participant, lets you know that you're welcome to leave the study at any time, to have questions answered, to know who to contact if you have any issues, and what the general purpose of the study is. So this is something that you sign to show you that you have rights and are empowered as a participant. You may also have someone fill out the consent for recording. So these are ethical standards, meaning they must be included in what you're doing. There are certain ethical guidelines that talk about how students who are involved in research should be treated. Should you ask students to be in your research? If you are, what's fair to them in terms of providing extra credit, providing alternate assignments for those who don't want to participate. um, there are certain circumstances where you may not need to have informed consent. Let's say that you're doing some research and just observing people's interactions in the mall. You're not taking down any identifying information, you're not taking pictures. Maybe you're just noting how often you notice public displays of affection. Well, in that case, you really may not need informed consent because they're not being directly impacted by your study in any way. There are ethical guidelines around how much you can offer someone to be involved in your study, making sure it's not coercive. Because if you're working, let's say, with someone who's vulnerable and you offer them an amount of money, just an excessive amount of money to be in your study, at that point, your inducement has become coercive. Maybe they're in a situation where they have no choice but to be in your study. So at that point, we're really taking away their ability to have free will in this situation. So making sure it's not overboard. And we've already discussed deception. Um, Consideration for debriefing, so following their participation, talking with participants about what the study was about and what exactly they did in the study. Of course, consideration for treatment of animals who may be involved in research, like primate research, lab rats, etc. How are they to be treated in a humane manner? And what types of considerations have you made for them? And even after you complete a study, there's a whole bunch of ethical codes related to what should happen then. So making sure that you're honest in the way that you report your research, that you're not plagiarizing anyone's work, being sure that everyone who has significantly contributed receives a credit, a publication credit, meaning that they're credited as an author or otherwise, that you're not duplicating your data in some way, and that you're protecting the data that you've collected so that individuals' responses, their identities, all of that is protected, and that no one has access to the data that hasn't been given permission by those who are participating. So that really is just a short summary, but as you can see, I mean, I only have listed here 15 different codes related to the research. There's many more, and they're much more extensive even than I've covered here. So you can see that doing research involves a pretty detailed understanding of a procedure that has been laid out to ensure the best outcome, not only for the researcher and the research being done, so protecting the creation of knowledge, but also for those who are going to participate who are potentially in a vulnerable situation. Now, this leads us back into this sort of thought of, okay, pursuing knowledge, protecting people. So this is, you'll find if you are in the PowerPoint later, you'll click on the trolley problem. This is a great scene. So just FYI, there's a little bit of gore involved in it. So if you don't like gore, maybe you might not want to watch it. But it's funny gore. It's a great scene from The Good Place where they go through the trolley problem. So the trolley problem, if you've never heard of it, is an ethical scenario in which you find yourself on a trolley and the brakes are broken, they're gone, and you look ahead and see that you are about to, maybe half a mile down the road, you're going to be running into a group of people who don't see the trolley coming, and you are potentially going to be plowing into that group of people and killing them. Now you can't stop the trolley because you don't have brakes, and there's nothing you can do to warn them in advance, but you can switch the tracks to where your trolley doesn't go into that group of people anymore. It goes into just one person. So there's an alternate train track that you can switch the trolley over to where only one person would be killed. So in the trolley problem, you're asked to consider, if you were in that situation, which thing would you do? Would you harm all of those people, so that you weren't consciously choosing to kill that one person? Or would you save a lot of people and then harm that one person? So take a moment, think about that. Imagine yourself on the trolley, you look ahead, there's a group of people, and there's that one solitary person. You can do nothing. You can choose to allow the trolley to plow into those people, or you can make the switch. Now, a lot of people would say, okay, yeah, I might make that switch to save more people. So, kind of going for just what's going to be back to that utilitarian way of thinking, what's going to be for the greater good. But let's imagine that that one person is someone that you know. So, think of your favorite person. Maybe it's a family member, a best friend. You don't know any of those strangers in that group, but your one favorite person that you do know is standing there by themselves. So previously, if you chose to just hurt that one person, are you changing up your answer, or are you going to stick with no, I'm still going to go with that one person? Or do you say, okay, no, I do know them and, I'm not going to harm them. So we're just going to let the trolley do what it's going to do. Okay, well, what if that group of people was a group of tiny children? So we can either, kill off this other person who you may know, or a whole group of small school children. Does that change your answer? What if you were originally going to harm the one person, but that is a school child and the rest are grown adults? What choice do you make then? So I could give you any number of scenarios, but I want you to think about it. Think about it as you're watching the video and consider this whole idea of cost benefit analysis. Obviously, you're never going to be in this situation, but it is worth thinking about when it comes to doing research. We're kind of put in a situation where we have the potential sometimes to cause a little bit of harm to a small number of people for the greater good, or maybe we continue to allow a problem to persist so that we don't harm a small number of people, thereby unintentionally harming a large number of people. So it's something to think about. Whenever we talk about doing research with human subjects, we have to ask ourselves, what are the costs and the benefits? And this is part of our application to the IRB. We have to justify what we're doing and talk about why the costs are worth the benefits. So if our study is producing a fair amount of harm, so causing people distress or potentially harming them in another way, but we don't have enough benefits to outweigh that, then we have to ask ourselves, is it really worth it? So the cost benefit analysis is a huge piece of um, doing research. Now, there are 5 potential benefits of research that can come about. So a good amount of benefits. Of course, basic knowledge. So research can give us just a basic understanding of things. So why do people do the things that they do? How do certain psychological principles function in the world around us? It can also improve research techniques. So sometimes we'll conduct studies that are known as pilot studies. And from there, we'll say, okay, here's what worked well in this, and here's what didn't work well. This isn't the best way to get at understanding how people in the military cope with depression, but this is a great way to get at that. And so then we switch over and retool our study, and we help other researchers understand what they can do differently in the future. And you'll see this a lot of times at the end of studies where they'll say, well, future researchers should consider doing this and this. So it helps us to continue to be better researchers as time moves forward. Um, there's practical outcomes, of course. So we do a research study and we find that, oh, like children who are exposed to trauma deal with depression and anxiety as in adulthood. And so now we know that minimizing children's exposure to trauma as children is a good idea, which makes like so much sense. But it's not something we always made a connection to. So there's just like practical outcomes. We actually find solutions to things and can then disseminate that information or put certain programs in place. It can, well, I think about, for example, so much research out there on things like ADHD. And now look, we have so many supportive programs and interventions that take place at the school level that have really practically helped and supported individuals with that diagnosis. It can be very beneficial for the researcher because you gain notoriety, I guess, to some degree, depending on what they're researching. It may help them with um, gaining a promotion. It can help them with developing a knowledge community. If they're trying to gain money to do more research in that area, putting out some initial research can help them to gain funding and grants and things like that. And then finally, for the research participants. So depending on if you're offering any inducement, they can have, anything from extra credit, money, healthcare benefits, and just generally the assistance in furthering the knowledge for humanity as well. So there's all kinds of benefits to research, and when you fill out an application to conduct a research study, you got to have some potential benefits in mind. And on the flip side, we have to think about what are the costs to the person. Now, typically, you want to say that you don't want to cause your research participant any more harm or distress than they might encounter in their daily life. And if you are going to be causing them stress beyond that point, the benefits that you then discuss and how you plan to manage that have to be included as well. So, a couple of important terms when it comes to research, because these are important. One is privacy. Now, privacy is something that we consider to be an individual's right to sort of control their own information. So people have a right to privacy. And what that means is when someone consents to being in your study, they have a right to disclose only the information that you've indicated to them that they'll be disclosing. So they should be able to protect their personal information, whether that is data, personal information about their life, parts of their identity. They should be able to only disclose what they are comfortable disclosing and nothing else. So researchers shouldn't pressure them to disclose anything beyond that. They shouldn't be utilizing additional information that has nothing to do with their study. They shouldn't be Googling their research participants after the study to get more information on them. So the person should have a right to privacy. The next thing is confidentiality. So there's a difference between confidentiality and anonymity, or keeping things anonymous. Now, a researcher who is conducting research, let's say on how individuals who are in college coped with the changes due to COVID last year. So let's say that I'm a researcher and I conduct a study with 10,000 college students. So I collect all of the responses to my survey. From there, I run some statistics and I say, okay, 90% of college students said that one of the ways that they coped with all of the changes was to spend a significant amount of time engaged in the use of media in some way. Well, what I'm doing is taking all of the information I got and synthesizing it and then putting it into these statistics, right? So the information is being kept confidential. I haven't identified any single person's answer, their name, any identifying information. All of that is kept confidential. I'm the only person that has access to it, and I'm putting it out there as like a bulk story and statistics and nothing identifiable. So that would be where things are confidential. On the other hand, sometimes the only thing we can do as researchers is plan to keep the information anonymous. And what that means is sometimes we have to put the information out there because of the type of study we're doing. So I do qualitative research, and what that means is I interview people and put together their stories to inform us on a specific topic. And because of that, I have to share the information they're sharing with me, because a lot of what my data is their story. So I can't guarantee confidentiality, but what I can guarantee is anonymity, meaning I'm not going to share their name or their specific age. I may say that they're in an age range and try to eliminate as much identifying information as I can. So they're telling their stories and their information's out there, but in an anonymous way. So it's important to know the difference, because when we conduct ethical research, we need to be able to guarantee privacy, and we need to make it clear to our research participants as well as the IRB if the information is going to be confidential or anonymous, and how we plan to do that. All right, so here, internal review board, institutional review board, depending on where you are, the name changes. Generally, we refer to this as the IRB. Now, depending on the size of the organization you're at, if you're at a larger university, you may find that they're their own department who get paid specifically to do this. If you're at a smaller university, you may find that the IRB is made up of volunteer faculty members. So it just depends. Their job is to review your research application and make sure that what you're doing is being done in an ethical manner, that you have the appropriate training, and they're going to continue to provide you oversight. And this is also important because it means that when you go to publish research or present a research, there's an understanding that you've done so with the eye of like your peers on your research, so people can trust that you've done it in an ethical manner. So at Kennesaw State, this is what the Institutional Review Board looks like, the website, and you can see here their purpose: to regulate all research activities involving human subjects on the campus of Kennesaw State, ensuring people who participate in research are treated ethically and in compliance with laws and regulations. And their principle is to protect human subjects, including the institution, the researchers, and their participants. And you can see here, they have all of this information about different classifications. So are you doing research directly with humans? Are you just doing research that involves data that was previously collected? When do they meet to talk? Who's on the board? All of this stuff you can find on their website. All right, so I always like to try to throw a little scandal in here, because psychology is such an exciting field because there's so many scandals, just too many to count. So I have 2 videos for you here. I think I also posted the links for you. Now, if you download this, you need to make sure that you enable the content when you download the PowerPoint file, or you're not going to be able to get the videos to play. So make sure you do that. Otherwise, you'll see the links on D12 for you. These are 2 famous experiments that they did a lot to tell us about. One, the little Albert experiment told us a lot about conditioning, but it's really sad because it involves conditioning this little baby to be fearful. Now, it taught us a lot. It pushed this particular field of knowledge forward, but certainly isn't something maybe that we would feel comfortable allowing today. And on the other side here, a famous experiment on obedience, in which participants were told that they would be reading to someone on the other side of a partition and asking them certain questions. And if they were to get those wrong, that they had to administer an electric shock. And that every time they got it wrong, they would increase the shock. Now, given enough time, the individual, who they've also been told has a heart condition, is given almost a lethal shock and then fakes having a heart attack to see if this person is going to continue to administer these shocks. Now, this was an important study because people were wondering after World War II, how could people have committed so many atrocities? And the answer from a lot of those people were, listen, we were just doing what we were told. And people were like, that's crazy. How could you even justify that? So Milgram really did a lot to show us how possible that was, given that these individuals continue to administer shocks even after the person acted like they were having a heart attack. Not that many people said, okay, I'm not doing this anymore. So Again, we have a really important study that kind of broke a big mystery in that understanding of obedience, and yet really unethical, completely distressed a significant amount of people. So it wouldn't be allowed. So I want you to check these videos out, consider what we've talked about, think about that cost benefit analysis as you watch these videos. And as I said, there are some other things for you to look at, and there's also a little bit of an extra credit experience for you as well on D2L if you want to do it by the end of the week. And that's it for ethics. So have a great week.